Hey everyone, and welcome to Voices of Veritas, a podcast made by the church for the church. I'm Ryan Hennigan.
And I'm Michael Bashaw. At Veritas Community Church, we believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ is at work in and through us, transforming all things.
On Voices of Veritas, you will hear real stories of gospel transformation, spiritual insights, and heartfelt conversations that seek to encourage us as we follow Jesus.
We invite you to join us twice a month to listen, learn, and grow in faith together.
Well, welcome to the Voices of Veritas podcast. I am joined today with my co-host, Michael Bashaw, and I am Ryan Hennigan. I probably should have led with that. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Ryan. How are you?
You know, if you couldn't tell, I'm a little discombobulated.
I actually couldn't tell. So.
Oh, good. Well, you know, I hide it well. Yeah, I'm doing all right. It's been a busy week. So glad it's Friday. So very happy about that. But what about you?
You know, I'm doing good. You're right. It's Friday night. So when we're recording this with Emily, and so what a great way to start off the weekend.
That's right.
A lot to mull over and think about this weekend after this conversation.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of Emily, we are joined today by Emily Billings.
Hey, guys.
Perfect. Sweet. Emily, you're here to talk to us today about Veritas's disability and inclusion ministry.
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending the Friday evening here at the recording room. So with that, we can go ahead and jump in. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself, Emily?
Yeah. So my name's Emily Billings. I've been a member at Veritas for almost 8 years now. And my husband and I moved to the Columbus area almost 8 years ago. And our oldest son was about 6 months old, and we moved to the west side. And we kept passing this church on Broad Street, and just had this big Veritas sign. Every time we'd pass it, we'd be like, oh, we should probably try that church. So lo and behold, we tried it, and we never left. Yeah. So that's been our church home, the West Campus for, almost coming up on a decade, which is pretty crazy. So, yeah, I know.
That is the wild. Michael, you've been at Veritas for almost 10 years, right?
I think it's been a decade now.
Maybe we should get medals.
Yes. The longest serving member. Yes, there we go.
Get like Veritas members jackets or something. That'd be great. So, Emily, you're here to talk about disability and inclusion ministry.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what is that? I mean, Michael and I were kind of talking to you a little bit before we started recording that as we have been interviewing people for the podcast, we have come across different ministries that Veritas either like runs and operates or partners with.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of were unfamiliar with them. And one of them was disability and inclusion. So can you tell us a little bit about like the who, what, when, where, and why of that?
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to. And I'll try to do it justice. We were supposed to have a friend, Kate, recording with us, and she's sick. So Kate, we're wishing you well. So it's just me. So if we need to, fact check any of these, we can do that later. But, so the disability and inclusion ministry really started, with, I don't want to say me, but, and I have 3 boys, and my oldest son, we started coming when he was 6 months old. When he was a we started noticing developmental delays. His communication was not, quite on par with his peers. This is a long story that I'm going to try to condense for you, but he was diagnosed with a hearing disorder that was progressive, and then Nationwide said, just kidding, his hearing's great. And then, so we just were all over the place with what's going on. So eventually he got an autism diagnosis. And that was actually in May of 2020. So just a personal story, that's, we're in the height of COVID, right? So it's a Zoom call with Nationwide Children's, and we're in our basement trying to get my son to perform these tasks and do these things because there's no blood test for autism, right? We are going off of a DSM criteria of, does he fit these? Does he check these boxes or not? And so I remember they talked to us and said they gave him an autism diagnosis. And then it was like, here's this one piece of paper and we'll see you later. Like, figure it out. I felt very much like I was thrown in the deep end. But we weren't going to church at the time, right? Like, all of us were at home. We were all in isolation. So that was really challenging. But then when things started to open back up, we were like, well, we're going back to church, And my oldest son's name is Abe, and Abe's needs had just really changed over that time. It wasn't because of COVID, but as far as his support needs, his communication needs, he wasn't as easily able to like fit in like a toddler classroom, right? And so there was just a lot of, are we gonna be able to go to our home church anymore? Like, I don't know. And where would we go if we have to leave? And I don't want to have to leave. My husband doesn't want to have to leave. It's the only church that Abe's ever known, and he is familiar with the space. There's that aspect. So we just started to have conversations with people about, hey, what would this look like if we stayed? We want to stay. We don't want to go. And this is what happens with a lot of families in this community. And so this sort of snowballed into getting him like a buddy on a Sunday morning, like a one-on-one, because he has really high support needs. So autism is a spectrum, right? And so he falls on a higher support needs end, like a level 3. He's a non-speaker. He uses an AAC device, which looks like an iPad, and it has buttons on it that will, he'll hit his favorite candy, and it'll be like mini Starburst, Target, anything like that. So helps him communicate, but he does not have any functional speech. And so it takes some knowledge and training and someone who's willing to learn and be with that person on a Sunday morning. And so it started that way. And then I was like, we can't be the only family who's experiencing this, right? Because it's a very isolating experience, being a disability family, being a parents of a child with a disability. And so I started connecting with some other people, tried to like network a little bit within the congregations. And so that's sort of how this team kind of organically came together. So at Short and Worth, it's Kate and Ashley, and at Tri-City right now, it's someone named Stephanie. And we all kind of meet together typically around once a month to see like how can we make our church more accessible, more inclusive. And the ultimate goal of that is sharing the gospel, right? Because how can you participate and learn and be part of discipleship and participate in the rhythms that you guys are talking about? Like, if you can't get in the building, or if you get in the building, but your sensory system is so overwhelmed by what's happening that you need to leave. And this just also isn't for just kids, right? Like Kate and I were saying, this is for ideally, like our goal is this is our whole church. Mm-hmm. We don't want this to just be like a kids ministry offshoot, or, because it's really a culture change of how do we include every body, every brain difference, every, as simple as like I've seen at the Short North, like the accessible parking, right? An accessible space in your sanctuary for someone in a wheelchair, someone with vision differences. Oh, how can we make those slides on Sunday morning? How can we change that, change the environment to make it more welcoming? I kind of think about it like you're setting the table for someone, right? And how are we going to set the table so that everyone has a seat? Because a lot of times outside of the church, there are all these systems that people with disabilities, families like ours, have to navigate, and it's barrier, closed door, like a lot of fighting, a lot of, not literally, but you're advocating, right? And so we want church to be a place where you don't have to do that. You know, that is like the heart of Jesus, where he's come and I'm going to give you rest. Just come and sit with me, come and be with me. You know, and in a kids ministry setting, I think like Jesus, when he says like, let the little children come to me, he doesn't say, let the kids come to me who can sit well and keep their bodies still and look like they're listening and use vocal speech and, right? It's like, let the children come to me, whatever that looks like. So I know that was a long-winded way of explaining it, but I want to make sure I emphasize like this is ideally in our dreams, a culture change for our entire church, like a top-down approach, if you will. You know, what does it look like to make community groups more accessible? What does it look like to make, other ministries more accessible to people as well? So, yeah.
Well, I mean, first, let me just say, I think it's like absolutely beautiful that you have this vision, that it's not just an offshoot of the kids ministry.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see how obviously you have a personal connection with this because of your son.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than throwing in the towel or getting frustrated or going a myriad of different directions that you could have gone, you decided to really figure it out, like, you know, and I'm sure that that's an ongoing process for all kinds of reasons, but you especially when it came to coming back to church after COVID and making sure that the church itself was what the church is supposed to be and be accessible for everybody and really presenting the gospel. I think that tying all those things together, your perseverance as a parent with a child with a disability or inclusion, your perseverance trying to share the gospel, your perseverance trying to get it to be all three congregations and church wide, and for adults as well. Like there's just so many tiers there, and there's a lot of passion and personal connection behind it that I think is what makes it something that's successful. You know, I mean, I have heard about this ministry multiple different times. I couldn't tell you really, other than the name of it, I couldn't really tell you like boots on the ground what it looked like. But for you to kind of just take this obstacle, but also make it into a passion and run with it, I think is definitely a testimony to not just you, but also all the people involved in the ministry. And I think it's only going to grow from here because of your guys' dedication. It wasn't like foisted upon you to do this. You've decided to seek it out.
Yeah. So my oldest son now is 8. And so I'm like, oh, math, we've probably been doing this or, you know, attempting what does this look like for like 6 years now. And it's taken different shapes and it's grown, but it's cool to look back, and this is sort of a cool part of being like in the life of the church for a long time, right? Is you can look back and see like what's God done here and what's he doing now and what's he going to do, and like we just get to be a part of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, you're taking your situation and you're being faithful with the Lord and then blessing others through it. And I think that's just a story of what the church is supposed to be. Kind of getting more into the weeds about how this started. Did you just approach like some of the elders, or did you approach maybe a deacon or just other people, other members of the church, and just say, I have this idea and here's kind of what's going on? Or
so I'm trying to actually think about this. I'm pretty sure. So West, we like to say, you know, we're like the tiny one. So our church is a little bit smaller. We have some specific ministries at our branch. And so our kids ministry is a lot smaller than like yours or like Short North's or Tri-Cities. So there was honestly a distinct advantage of starting there. So the kids ministry director at the time, I approached her because for me as a parent, I was like, well, I gotta go see, you know, how are we going to make this work every Sunday? Because if he can't be in kids ministry, like realistically, like we can't go to church. And again, like I can There's some statistics out there, but that's what happens, right, to families like ours. When you, as a family or when you're a child, it's like the feeling of being too much, or we can't have you here, which again happens in other areas too, right? Restaurants, schools. So at church, if that happens, sometimes there's some church hurt that's happened in the past. Or so I kind of started with, what's my most direct way to like not fix the problem, but just how can we keep going to church? And so that was really neat because God did a work in my friend Tiffany. I love her. Shout out Tiffany if you're listening. In her heart, where she just took it under her wing to do this. And, fast forward to April, we had a whole team of people that were able to go to the Disability in the Church conference in Washington, D.C. And I cannot describe to you how much that meant to me personally, to see how far we've come as far as leadership buy-in, to be honest, like this top-down approach of like, oh, this is very important and we want these families to feel welcome. And not only do we want to retain the families we have, but who's not here and why are they not here? So yeah, it was she's not our director anymore, but a previous director. And she just kind of, took it upon herself. And that was totally a God thing because to be honest, I didn't have the energy to carry it all myself. And to have someone, it feels like a load, right? At this weight. And she was like, oh, I'll carry this with you. And honestly, she carried more of it than I did. So it was really special. And then we started training our volunteers because, it can't just be her, right? To work with my son. What does it look like? And then we had a few other kids who started presenting some needs, whether that was a behavioral need or, maybe a kiddo is diagnosed with ADHD or they're just moving around the room a lot. And like, how do we meet them where they are, make the gospel accessible in that space? So that was sort of how that all started.
Thank you for just giving such a great first answer. I don't even like calling it an answer because like we're just here to learn from you. Mm-hmm. And you presented that so clearly, your experience personally, and then bringing that into the church. So I would love to hear a little more about even before you came to the church with these ideas or this need that you discerned. Mm. What was that like for you? Like how did you walk through that? And then how does that add to what you discerned to be a real need for the church?
Yeah. So, and I'll preface this by saying I came into this situation with a lot of privilege. Like I didn't really have to navigate any systems whatsoever, really my whole life up to this point. And I'm acknowledging that other individuals do from the get-go or because of their socioeconomic status or what have you. So
can you clarify what you mean by systems?
Yeah. So like the healthcare system, I never really had an issue, right? Like I don't have a chronic illness or things like that. The insurance system, the fighting for certain services, the educational system. I never really had to think about them. And then I think previously I was like, I felt like I was just thrown in the deep end because I had no prior knowledge, for better, for worse, right? I wish I did, but I didn't. And so I really had to teach myself because you're like, well, I don't really have a choice here. Like I have to do the best I can for my son and what does he need right now. And there was a lot of grief happening. So I remember he first got diagnosed with this hearing disorder and I was in the room with the ENT doctor as he's delivering this message to us, having like your whole body get hot and you can't quite hear what he's saying, but all you hear is that this is going to progress to total deafness, and you're talking ASL, and then you're talking hearing aids, but how are we going to pay for these hearing aids? And it was just, and then, he's just sitting on my lap, right? It's like, oh, this is just Abe, right? But then the way that they start talking about your son is there's no, it's very cut and dry, and it's very deficit based. And and so that's again, long story short, he does not have hearing aids anymore. They realized that he actually is autistic, and you can have both, I suppose, but for Abe, he's autistic and hears very, very well. And so that was hard too, because we thought it was one thing, and then rug pulled out for me. Just kidding. Really big pivot here. It's this. So the research that you're doing to understand what this is and to just wrap your mind around everything. And at the same time, you're still doing bedtime, you're still going to the grocery store. You're still like having, lovingly frustrating conversations with your parents. They're saying something weird, and sharing that information with family. So you receive this diagnosis, like I was saying, we're in our basement, and then you're like, how do I tell other people about this? And we all have different levels of knowledge, right? Some people don't know what autism is. Some people may have grown up with an autistic sibling, like or for me, I really had very, very little knowledge. And so it was a very steep learning curve and had a lot of grief feelings, but I didn't necessarily know where to put them. No one wanted to say, this is terrible, Of course, nobody wants to say those things, but that's how I felt. And so it was a lot of, as even now I'm reflecting as I'm doing work with other parents and therapy groups and things like that, a little bit of toxic positivity where I'm having these very honest, real, raw feelings. I'm feeling isolated because I don't know who to talk to about it or where to go. I know no one else with a child with autism at the time. And it's COVID. And I also had just had another baby. So, I'm in so it was all like a big storm of things. And you're also isolated from your church community, right? And so like, where is God in all of this? What do I even believe anymore? It's very tumultuous and challenging. And so needing a community at that time is so vital. And so that's why, like, kind of what drives my passion around having an accessible church community that can rally around you and can kind of sit in the trenches with you as you're feeling those very real feelings. They're valid. They do not mean I don't love my child, right? They do not mean that I think autism is terrible. I don't, right? Like I'm way, way, way into the acceptance phase at this point. But in those initial times, it's very challenging. And then your partner and your spouse might be handling things totally different than you, processing things different. And so you get into, it's a lot going on for a family. So that's a little bit of behind the scenes emotionally. So
feel free to not answer this question, but very curious to know when you're wrestling with thoughts of where's God in this?
Yeah.
How do I do this without a church community? What is that like for you as a parent or as a spouse on a spiritual level? Like when you're asking God these questions of maybe why is this happening, or what am I supposed to do from here, or whatever those questions were for you, what was that like?
It was hard. But also very good. And again, I'm looking retroactively. I'm looking back at this. So at the time, I don't think I would have said the word good. Being challenged in your faith in specific seasons, I think can be a really good thing, where you're forced to kind of go get to the bare bones of like, what do I really believe? Like, who do I really believe God is? What do I believe his role is in our family, in this situation? And then honestly, fighting some of the messages that we were getting about, I don't know how to say this. It might be a little bit controversial, but again, a little bit of the toxic positivity of like, God has a plan, you know. I have also like lost a parent, and when you go through really hard times of grief, sometimes when people do their best and they don't know what they don't know, but maybe they throw a Bible verse at you and they're trying to be encouraging, but it feels like you're putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, right? It's not gonna stick. It's not really gonna, and it's not acknowledging my experience. And so I had to really not rely so much on other people to give me that comfort. I had to go to the source. That was a very refining time for me.
That sounds hard on so many levels. And like you mentioned, the grief that comes with that, and that we're meant to process grief in community.
Mm-hmm.
That's how, that's like such a healthy function of community. And yet also the tension of if things felt either insensitive or a little bit of the toxic positivity
Mm-hmm.
with the sentiments or the messages you were getting, that's a place that church can really struggle sometimes. And
Absolutely.
it's a place that that reveals maybe the people who say those things their own uncomfortableness with,
Oh, yeah.
with
Yeah.
what they're witnessing
And
or with their own faith.
full acknowledgement, right? I had done that to other people because I thought that's just what you were supposed to do. Or, yeah, I was uncomfortable. And I also felt like I couldn't really say how I actually felt. And so instead, I would then be like, we're going to be fine. This is fine. It was not. I was not fine, right? I like honestly don't remember a ton from that season. It feels kind of like a dark spot with some trauma of that. And so yeah, it's hard. I think the church could learn a lot from, walking people through grief and acknowledging these really human emotions that we have. And again, the duality of like two things can be true at once. I can be experiencing a lot of doubt and deep grief and pain, and Jesus is still who he is, right? That does not have to hit themselves against each other. So, yeah.
A minute ago, you said I had to go to the source for myself. What's this like? What is the source, and what did that look like for you?
Oh, just getting really quiet.
Okay.
Learning how to sit with those uncomfortable feelings, like with the Lord. So for me, it was, getting quiet, a lot of meditation, and I want to qualify that a little bit, of just silence, and maybe reading a little bit of scripture here and there, to be honest. Like, I was a kid who grew up in a Christian school, had to memorize Bible verses, grew up in church. So it was in there, I knew. But I was not like reading swaths of scripture at a time. I didn't have the energy, I was like, can I get out of bed today? And what do I need to get through today, make it through bedtime? And what calls do I have to make? And what appointments do I have to go to? And do I feel like showering? And so this is where you're getting also into the mental health intersection too. And so God really met me in that space. It wasn't necessarily, I didn't have the energy, right, to go hard after this. And this is my own personal, but like this one-on-one quiet time type of vibe. It was like, I'm just going to take some deep breaths in my bed before I get out of bed and say a really, whatever sentence of a prayer I can muster of like, I just need your help to get through the next several hours, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was very, simplified from what I had been taught and been used to, and from what the church had communicated to me about what our relationship with the Lord should look like. And so it was a newer experience for sure.
Before we started recording, I was just asking you a few questions, and I think you said you were currently going to school for cognitive behavioral therapy. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. So right now I'm in grad school. I'm an oldie. They call it an encore career. Fun fact, I did not know. So I was a teacher, and that's another part of this journey, right? Realizing, the career I always thought I would have. This is going to need to look different, and how is that going to change? And so needing to stay home way longer than I had planned. So right now I'm in grad school for, I'm getting my license in clinical mental health counseling. So you said cognitive behavioral therapy. That's like one way to do therapy, right? CBT. It's very common.
Got it.
And so my license will just be like, think of your average like mental health counselor, you know?
Cool.
Yeah.
Seeing how God has brought you on this journey, like I think that maybe these things would it be fair to say kind of prepared you for that a little bit, or?
Oh, 1000%. I would not be in the program I'm in if I didn't have my son. I would not be doing what I'm doing now if and so that's kind of what I mean when you look back retroactively and just to see what God has done and how he's very clearly orchestrated things on your journey in life, it's more, I think that's also where my faith is strengthened of like, let's look back and see what he's already done. And so then when I'm terrified of the future, right, how could I possibly leave this earth and leave my son on this earth? Like those are real, very real thoughts. But that is my one thread, like I'm holding on to it with dear life, right? My faith. And sometimes it's bigger one day. Sometimes it feels very thin and small. But yeah, looking back and seeing all the things that God has done in and through all of my unlearning and learning with my son, gives me energy to have some hope for the future.
With that, I'd love to move into what the disability inclusion ministry looks like at Veritas.
Yes.
Can you give us a little timeline on, I think you briefly touched on it, but how it started, and then what were some of the first things you noticed that needed change or acknowledgement, specifically here at Veritas, and what's been some of the practical work you guys have been doing here?
Yeah, so I think I'll probably hit on just some big themed ideas as I'm talking, and I'll give some practical examples too. But this again, like to harken back to the beginning, this is like a church-wide culture change, and how we view other people and how we welcome other people and what does belonging look like, all these things. So probably this would have started right post-COVID, whenever we were kind of getting back up and running, and it really probably stayed at West for a while. And I can't remember, it must have been we combined services for certain things, right? So sometimes we'll do a Christmas service together. Sometimes we'll do Easter. I think we did all at the UA high school one year. We all went together, and immediately my husband and I were like, we can't do that. We're not going to be able to go to that. And my friend Tiffany's like, well, why not? Or how can we get you there? You know? So again, she has this, the Lord's working in her life at the time. She has this like fresh energy and vision, and she's learning a ton. And I'm exhausted, and trying my best. And so we did things like we started to train our volunteers, but we opened it up. So if Short North volunteers wanted to come, if Tri-City volunteers, this is kids ministry, wanted to come, they were welcome. We did that a few times, and I brought in the director over at Veritas, Amanda. She runs their entire disability ministry, and that's a church that is way bigger than us. They have tons of resources. They've been doing it for a really long time. So I'm like, let's not reinvent the wheel here. Like, who can we bring in from the community? So
What church was that again?
Vineyard.
Oh, Vineyard.
Yeah. So did I say that right? Yeah. So, so we, teaching the kids ministry volunteers, because that's where it really started at the time, about sensory sensitivities, right? And what do you do with a kid, who is exhibiting certain behaviors? And I think that, again, we sort of have these views of children and behaviors, especially on a Sunday morning. It can get a little chaotic, right? And how to equip them to serve these kids well, and not to just be a childcare, babysitting, whatever we want to call that, but how do we get the gospel to these kids in an accessible way? And so that started with, training our volunteers. That started with having a buddy up in front. Like, how could Abe participate in where the kids sing the cute Christmas songs in the front of the church, And it looked different, but he did it. He was up there. He was pacing back and forth, but that's okay. It needed to start to be okay, But some people, that's a culture shift. It's like, I have to put on a different set of lenses here and understand that this is what it looks like when everyone is included. It's not going to look maybe as uniform or as ship-shape, but it's a very, very beautiful thing when you experience it and when you see it. And so we started to just sort of extend the arms. So then we started to get people from other congregations coming, started our inclusion team. We started meeting once a month. Then we're like, well, and again, I'm just experiencing my own son, but I'm like, well, how can they do VBS? He can't just do that by himself. What would that look like? And so we just kind of started asking questions, getting curious, and seeing how we can support and learning a lot along the way, right? We would do something and meet later and we'd be like, okay, what went well and what was horrible? Like, what crashed and burned? And then how do we, take the bits that we learned and went well, learn from our mistakes. And so, like, for example, this past summer, short and road to the VBS, Abe had a one-on-one aide. And for the first time in his life and in my life, I was so proud of him. He was able to participate completely in all of VBS. And he had the support he needed, right? Like, there's that cheesy phrase of, what do you do with a plant or a flower that's like dying or withering or, has a funky like look to it? It's like, you don't yell at the flower, you don't like scold it, you don't change the plant, you change the environment in the plant, and then it's able to thrive. So it's like, that's the kind of lens that we're putting on of like, how do we change these environments? But again, that's like where you need the leadership buy-in. And so the slow and steady faithfulness of like, we're knocking on the door. How are we, Christmas, here we go. And these yearly events. And so then we have these all congregation things, and that can be really overwhelming. We had a soccer camp this summer, and so we were able to do a sensory time, like a 30 minutes before the soccer camp started. We had kids who had, anyone who wanted to, who maybe had a sensory challenge or a disability or could be easily overwhelmed by a soccer camp full of kids, could come and just have a slow start. We had a sensory tent set up with fidgets and different things where if they needed a break, they could go. So it's all about like making our environments more accessible, changing our environments. Again, this is like, the table analogy of like, we might need some different plates, we might need some different looking chairs. We might need, a different height, or keeping with that analogy of like, how do we change this table in order to have everybody have a seat? Because eventually I want Abe to be able to serve at this church. I want Abe to be able to have had access to gospel in the kids ministry, to be discipled, to like, we want to equip these individuals to have leadership positions at our church if they want, I think that's like our end goal. I want to make sure I'm clear that it's not like, we're like, oh, we're bending down and like kind of a pity vibe of like, oh, they just really need us. And like, let's pat ourselves on the back because we're such good people. It's like, no. Like, they absolutely deserve to be here. And it's our job as believers, in my opinion, to like make a way, and historically it's hard because the church, like churches, they aren't always ADA compliant, like we're lucky over at Tri-City because about a library, but we don't always have the accessible spaces, and we don't have necessarily the knowledge, unless maybe you have like families who come in and start, pushing people and moving things around to really learn about disability and about inclusion. And again, asking the question of like, well, who's not at our church and why are they not here? I think it's in the 80 percentile of families of children with disabilities who like don't attend church at all. The disability community at large, so I'm not talking about just kids, but adults as well, the largest minority in the world. And you can enter it at any time in your life. You could have an accident and have a spinal cord injury. I have a couple of friends who are diagnosed with MS. Like, there are so many different ways that you can be a part of this community. It's massive. And so I think where the church needs to maybe, I don't know how to say this, catch up a little bit with itself of like, how are we meeting these people where they are? What do they not want to come, and why? Like, what do they feel like is not accessible here? Do they feel like the gospel's not accessible? There's some history there with some exclusion, and yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So for kids ministry, we do have one-on-one buddies who volunteer, and they rotate. So my son has a different buddy each week, but the same one. So he is forming relationships with those individuals. And we actually changed our entire kids curriculum to an adapted curriculum. So we realized, what we're using is not necessarily accessible. And we trialed it with like the whole kids ministry, and everybody benefited. Everybody, typically developing kids, not typically developing kids. We're talking everybody benefits. It's like if you build a playground, right? There's one playground in Columbus they just built, and it's completely accessible. And every time I've gone, there's not one kid who's not enjoying themselves, whether that's a kid in a wheelchair, whether that's a kid with a developmental disability. It does look different than, the playgrounds that we're used to, but like everybody benefits from this practice is what I'm trying to say.
What does church just get wrong about this sometimes, like on a broader cultural level? And again, I know it can be controversial, but you talk about privilege, and I would certainly say that sometimes the privilege of not having to be educated about something or someone.
This is my people-pleasing tendency where I'm like, is this gonna come? How is this gonna come off? And am I being critical? But I do think it is our responsibility to shed light where, again, I don't think anyone's coming at this maliciously, right? No one has ill intent and purposely like, we want to exclude X, Y, and Z. No one is doing that, right? But it's quiet, right? There's this massive gap where like we don't know what we don't know. But like, I love the phrase, when we know better, we can do better, right? And the Lord gives us that knowledge. But I said that 80% statistic earlier. And so I think working on uncovering the barriers in accessing the church, and I think like the biggest blind spot of the church is what we don't know or what we aren't looking for. And so if we're not out looking, or we're not being curious about, again, who's not here and why, we're not going to be ready to welcome these people when they do come. It's a perfect example of having an accessible parking space and making an accessible space in the sanctuary, that, that handicap, like carpet square, whatever you want to call it. And maybe we do that before there's even an individual with a wheelchair or a mobility issue that tries to come, right? We're preparing the way. We are setting the table. But not a lot of churches are doing that. Some barriers that I've heard are, like, we're just so busy and our volunteers are already maxed out. We're exhausted. We don't have the money. Even phrases like, again, this is just in what I've heard in the greater church community of like, well, if we do this, like, we're just going to be overrun, and just that's some really honest feedback from the church currently, right? Of some real fears, right? I think those are all fear-based statements. And I think that's something we can check ourselves on. Again, acknowledging what's coming up and why am I afraid? And this can start so small, right? Just because we can't do everything doesn't mean we can't do something, right? It started with just my son. How can we go to church? One family, right? And it trickles, right? It ripples that effect. And no one's calling your church saying, by the way, Veritas, I didn't attend your church because of XYZ. Nobody's doing that. They're just not coming. A really simple example this year, West got electric drums. So a worship service can be really overwhelming for a sensory sensitive individual. And something small like that makes a big difference where it's not these really loud drums that are like big and booming and echoing. Instead, we can kind of control the sound and it makes it more accessible. And again, that looks different. It looks so different than what we grew up with, but it's so beautiful.
For the Veritas Disability and Inclusion Ministry today, what is the biggest need?
Honestly, like compassionate, curious people who would like to be involved, whether that looks like coming to the inclusion meetings and having more of those visionary discussions of, hey, let's design the Inclusion Sunday lesson for the middle schoolers. And like, what does that look like, teach middle schoolers about disability? Or if that looks more like on a Sunday morning, you want to be in that buddy role, in the one-on-one role, where you're developing relationships, where you're making the gospel accessible. So we're actively looking for more people. And I know that this is hard to hear, and please don't shut your ears when you hear this of like more volunteers, but this is like volunteering in a very specific capacity. I think I can pitch this, but like the work that you're doing is incredibly impactful. Not only are you again, making the space and making the way for someone to attend church or be part of an event or part of a rhythm that we do, but you're also equipping a family and enabling a family to go to church, because I need to be here. Like, I need to keep myself healthy and my husband and I healthy in order to like parent well and keep caregiving well, right? We need that. We need that community. And so it's a twofold, you're serving the person and then you're also serving the larger families and you're serving the larger church. Like for Abe to be able to go to VBS with his younger brother that was huge for us, because that was not possible before. And so there was a separation there where there's some things. I have two other sons, both typically developing. There's some things my neurotypical son can do and should do and love for him to do that Abe doesn't get to do. And so there's just this desire as a family of like, we want them to do things together and experience things together, especially in a church setting. I've learned so much from other disabled adults, and those are the voices that we really need to listen to, because they have a lot to say about the church at large and things like that. And so I think that's really important too, is how do we keep, opening the doors and looking and asking the right questions and seeking to get folks in the space.
Well, Emily, thank you so much. I think I speak for Michael and I both when I just say it's been an absolute honor just to listen to your testimony and the wisdom that you have. And I know that it will definitely be, edifying to the body, and we'll just continue to keep an eye on the ministry for sure.
Thanks for having me, you guys. This has been so fun. Yeah, good.
Well, that'll do it for us today on the Voices of Veritas podcast. Tune in next time.